In the small, picturesque town of Ashford, England, nestled among rolling hills and idyllic meadows, stood the ancient church of St. Agnes. Constructed in the 14th century, the church was made of weathered stone and featured breathtaking stained glass windows that bathed the interior with ethereal light. It was a place of worship and a sanctuary for the community for generations. However, in the autumn of 1912, a series of inexplicable and chilling events began to unfold within the hallowed walls of St. Agnes, casting an ominous shadow over the town. The first incident occurred during a Sunday service. As the parishioners bowed their heads in prayer, a low, guttural growl echoed through the church, followed by the unmistakable sound of something scratching at the wooden pews. The congregation froze in fear, unable to pinpoint the source of the disturbance. Over the following weeks, the strange occurrences intensified. Parishioners reported seeing flickering shadows that seemed to take on menacing forms, and heard whispers of despair that resonated throughout the church's dark corners. As the disturbing events escalated, so too did the fear that gripped the townspeople. One foggy evening, Reverend James Hawthorne, the church's young and dedicated pastor, decided to confront the inexplicable events head-on. He announced a week of nightly prayer vigils to drive out whatever malevolent force had taken hold in St. Agnes. His courageous stand drew both admiration and concern from the townspeople. The first night of the vigil, Reverend Hawthorne, accompanied by a handful of brave parishioners, gathered in the dimly lit nave of the church. As they prayed, the air grew colder, and the shadows crept closer, as if seeking to extinguish the light of their candles. When a loud, anguished wail filled the church, the parishioners fled, leaving Reverend Hawthorne alone to face the darkness. Over the next several nights, the Reverend persisted in his prayers, despite the unseen forces that tormented him. The sounds of scratching and growling intensified, and the Reverend began to experience terrifying visions that threatened to shatter his sanity. On the fifth night, as the shadows closed in on him, Reverend Hawthorne saw the figure of a young woman, her face twisted with pain and sorrow. In a moment of clarity, the Reverend realized that the malevolent force haunting the church was the spirit of a woman named Margaret, who had been accused of witchcraft in the 17th century. Margaret had been tortured and executed on the very grounds where St. Agnes now stood. Her spirit, consumed by pain and a desire for revenge, had been awakened when the church's ancient burial grounds were disturbed during a recent renovation. With this newfound understanding, Reverend Hawthorne prayed for Margaret's spirit to find peace and forgiveness. As he spoke the words, a warm, golden light filled the church, banishing the darkness and the tormenting shadows. The growls and scratching ceased, and a sense of calm settled over St. Agnes once more. The events of that fateful autumn became a legend in the town of Ashford. Reverend Hawthorne's bravery and compassion had not only liberated the tormented spirit of Margaret, but also restored peace and faith within the community. To this day, the story of St. Agnes and the unholy shadows that once haunted its walls serves as a chilling reminder of the power of love, forgiveness, and the need to confront the darkness within ourselves.
In a remote village in the Carpathian Mountains of Romania, there once stood a small, abandoned chapel surrounded by a dense, dark forest. Despite its isolation, the chapel was known far and wide for the sinister occurrences that seemed to take place within its walls. The chapel was built in the early 18th century by a group of devout monks who sought to escape the distractions of the world and focus on their spiritual growth. For many years, the monks lived in peace and harmony, their lives dedicated to prayer and contemplation. However, as the years passed, a sense of unease began to pervade the monastery. Rumors of strange happenings began to circulate among the villagers who lived nearby. They spoke in hushed tones of screams echoing through the forest, sightings of ghostly figures, and shadows that seemed to come alive, haunting the periphery of the chapel. Fearful of what they did not understand, the villagers began to shun the monastery and the monks who resided there. The monks, determined to maintain their sanctuary, tried to ignore the sinister forces that seemed to be encroaching upon their home. They continued to pray and perform their daily rituals, but the darkness persisted, and the once peaceful monastery became a place of fear and isolation. In the winter of 1752, a young monk named Father Alexandru arrived at the chapel. He had heard the tales of the horrors that plagued the monastery, and he was determined to uncover the truth behind the chilling occurrences. With unwavering faith and courage, Father Alexandru delved into the dark history of the chapel and the surrounding area. His research led him to discover that long before the chapel was built, the land had been the site of a brutal massacre. A group of ruthless marauders had invaded the village, slaughtering its inhabitants and leaving a trail of death and destruction in their wake. The souls of the slain villagers, restless and filled with anguish, had been haunting the forest ever since, drawn to the chapel as a beacon of light in their eternal darkness. Realizing the true nature of the malevolent forces that plagued the monastery, Father Alexandru resolved to help the restless spirits find peace. He performed a series of exorcisms and blessings, calling upon the power of his faith to cleanse the land and release the trapped souls from their torment. The process was arduous and dangerous. The spirits, driven mad by their suffering, lashed out at Father Alexandru, manifesting in terrifying forms and attempting to drag him into their realm of darkness. But the young monk's faith never wavered, and eventually he succeeded in banishing the evil from the chapel and the surrounding forest. The haunting of the chapel in the woods became a distant memory, and life in the village slowly returned to normal. The monastery was eventually reclaimed by nature, and the monks who had once called it home dispersed to other monastic communities. Today, the ruins of the chapel are still hidden deep within the forest, a testament to the courage and faith of a young monk who dared to confront the darkness and bring peace to a place once shrouded in terror. Father Alexandru's story remains a powerful reminder of the strength of the human spirit and the ability to triumph over the most horrifying of circumstances.